Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. Let me start with a couple of questions to the room, and we'll do a show of hands. One, how many of you feel confident, truly confident, that your current set of skills will last you through to the end of your career, whenever that may be? Raise your hands if you feel confident. Okay. All right, about 20% of the room. About 20% of the room. Now, raise your hands if you also feel very confident advising a young person today on what they should study for their future career. Okay, much fewer people. We must talk to those two people on that side of the room afterwards, and a couple back there because they have the secret. This is not uncommon. I have asked this set of questions in many, many rooms with many global CEOs, many senior government officials, with heads of unions, and the answers are pretty much the same. People feel somewhat more confident than they do for themselves than they do for the future, but overall the numbers are very low. And this is not surprising because we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, as we call it at the World Economic Forum. So let me start off a little bit with what those trends are and what that might mean for us. Before I do that, let me say a little bit about the World Economic Forum itself. The forum started nearly 50 years ago at the annual meeting in Davos in January. Will be our 50th anniversary. And we started out as an organization that founded by Professor Klaus Schwab that brings together a number of business leaders. And we very quickly moved on to trying to have a multi-stakeholder communities, then went on to developing knowledge, then went on to generating projects. And now we've moved into what we would call becoming a platform or an operating system for driving forward change on specific challenges around the world. We focus on about 18 platforms. Those 18 are listed here. Hopefully you can see that. It ranges from investing and media, entertainment and culture, to mobility, to global public goods, and then the area that I'm responsible for, which is new economy and society. And I'll skip descriptions of it and move us straight into our discussion. So the fourth industrial revolution, the way we see it, is this coming together of cyber physical systems and networks together with artificial intelligence. So biological worlds and physical worlds and chemical worlds all coming together, combined by data in a way that simply hasn't happened before. And we asked the heads of HR, CEOs, heads of strategy, and chief technology officers of a very large range of global companies around the world how quickly they were planning to adopt some of these new technologies. And what we found is that, certainly not surprisingly, about 85% were planning to use big data, 75% were planning to use app and web-enabled markets, and all the way at the bottom, 23% were planning to use humanoid robots, 19% were planning to use aerial and underwater robots. So across these companies, across different sectors, this is what the general picture looks like. We did this in 2018. This is what the world may look like by 2022. So it's not surprising that many of us are not ready to raise our hands when we're asked if our skills will last us through to the end of our working lives. This is, of course, leading to a shift in the barrier between the work that is being done by people and the work that is being done by machines. What you see on the left-hand side is, in the aggregate, we asked business leaders to sum up, for all of the current tasks that are being performed in a company today, what percentage are being done by people and what percentage are being done by machines of some form, whether that is artificial intelligence or robots. 71% said that current tasks, or rather 71% of current tasks, are being done by people. And we asked them for a trend analysis. And they expected that by 2022, that would be 58%. By 2025, that would be 48%. There's a caveat here, though, which is this is about today's tasks. This is not about the new tasks that will be generated by the new types of business models that are emerging with some of the integration of technology. Maybe one other piece to point out is, it's not surprising at the very bottom you see what that shift will look like for information and data processing. Not surprising, computers are much better at this than we are, so there's going to be a pretty big shift. It's already just 47% machines. That will be 62% machines by 2022. However, on the other end, and this is perhaps slightly more concerning, reasoning and decision making. 19% machines today, 28% machines by 2022. Again, not surprising. If we can build algorithms and artificial intelligence that can take on some of that reasoning and decision making, we are starting to see some of that shift. But again, this is just based on today's tasks. It doesn't mean that we can't move on to others. And that brings me to my next point. So there is overall a net positive outlook for jobs. And we've done this survey in many ways, in different places, with different types of business leaders. This is the picture globally. This is the picture in the aggregate, but this is also the picture by industry and by country. There is no one who wholly loses out because of the fourth industrial revolution. There is a net positive. So with just the 15 countries that are covered here, 133 million new jobs, 75 million declining jobs. That is still a very big shift for people to manage. That is still a very big shift for economies to absorb, but overall there is a net positive. Now, in terms of what's declining and what's emerging, I don't think you'll be surprised to know that what's emerging is data analysts and scientists and AI and machine learning specialists, but also people who are organizational development specialists. And what that essentially means is human resources. HR is going to be one of the most critical professions of the future because we have to handle change in organizations in a very different way. In terms of declining roles, again, not surprisingly, data entry clerks, because we simply don't need that anymore. Accounting and bookkeeping, administrative and executive secretaries, postal service clerks. So these are the types of things that are declining. This has been shown not just in our work, but studies by the OECD, studies by many others. There will be a premium on soft skills as well as advanced cognitive skills. So what you see on the right-hand side is the declining set of skills: manual dexterity, endurance, and precision. This is the type of work that is happening in many factories that is being displaced. Management of financial and material resources. That's essentially accounting. Technology installation and maintenance. It depends very much on what type of technology we're talking about, but this rose to the surface. In terms of growing jobs, skills, analytical thinking and innovation, active learning and learning strategies, creativity, originality, and initiative, technology design and programming. What's interesting there is it's a lot of the softer, very human skills that are rising to the top. It's not just the ability to work with technology. Now, what does that mean for business and government? We've been working with a number of experts around the world, with various governments, with various businesses, and there are a number of different implications that come up. One is there is a reskilling revolution needed. And that revolution will need to be preparing people in the short term, but it will also need to leave the legacy of a dynamic system that continues to provide people with an opportunity to reskill and upskill. To give you a quick example, by 2022, this is not for jobs that will be displaced, this is for jobs that will stay, 42% of the core skills are expected to change. So between 2018, when we conducted this study, to 2022, in just 4 years, 42% of the skill set are expected to change. Again, that explains why most of us would be hesitant to raise our hands. By 2022, everyone will need an extra 101 days of learning. So we also calculated what type of hours and time would be required on average. For some professions, we're talking about 2 years of reskilling. For some, we're talking about 2 days. But on average, this comes out to be 101 days. But how many of us know organizations that would give us 3 months out every year to do that extra learning? We don't. That is simply not how most organizations are set up. A second implication is that we can use the very technologies that are causing some of these disruptions to actually do much better analysis and understanding of how we should invest in skills and how we should do some of the reskilling and redeployment that's needed. So what you see here is a complex chart, but a very simple example where we were partnered with Burning Glass Technologies, which is a firm that is essentially looking at all of the job postings on the internet in English-speaking countries, And it's basically trying to find out what are the skills bundles inside, let's say, job A that's being disrupted, and the skills bundles in job B that, let's say, is growing, and what is the match in between the two. And what we find is, for example, secretaries and administrative assistants, a role that is going down. There are 20 viable and desirable transitions within the industry. So viable meaning it's actually possible with a 15% change in skills, and desirable meaning that there will actually be an increase in wages. So there are a number of different options that are available. Of course, this is from the US labor market. This can be done in other markets as well. Another implication is that collaboration is going to be needed at scale. So what you see there is if each individual company took on the reskilling and upskilling burden on its own, they would only be able to reskill 25% of workers profitably. When I say profitably, there will be returns within a reasonable time frame. If companies work with each other across industry lines, they will be able to profitably reskill 45% of workers. If governments did this alone, they have the possibility to do this for 77% of workers with reasonable expectation that this would generate social mobility, this would generate new jobs, et cetera, in the next couple of years. And if the public sector and the private sector work together, 90% of workers could be reskilled, be upskilled, and ensure that they would actually be able to move into a different role. Now again, this is one study. It's based on the US. It's based on the 34 billion cost that is required for reskilling and upskilling the workers that are at risk in the US. And there may be very different pictures that emerge in different economies, but in general, public and private collaboration is going to be required if we want to take on this challenge. One other implication is learning 4.0. So how do we actually get to the type of learning that is required in the future so we're not always playing catch up in the workforce? And that's where some pretty fundamental reforms are going to be required in education systems. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new here, but one is the shift in content that's required. We are going to need to develop active learning skills so that children are able to continue to learn in the future. We are going to require innovation skills. We are going to require technology skills, and children have to be able to work with technology in today's education systems. And finally, we're going to require interpersonal skills. And this is the one that comes up over and over and over from business, who say education systems are teaching kids competition. They're basically teaching you, you're either at the top of your class or you're not. Whereas what we actually need in the workforce is collaboration and interpersonal skills and teamwork, and that is something that most children acquire way too late and not early enough. And on the right-hand side, you see the mechanisms that have to change. There's a lot of new technology available that can make learning personalized and self-paced, that can make learning much more accessible and inclusive, that can make it much more problem-based and collaborative, and people can work together online, children can work together even online. And then much more lifelong and learner-driven, and that's at the upper end, which is after people have left school or university. So in terms of Ireland's skills-related score, this is an area where the country does fairly well at present, but has been declining over the last couple of years, according to our Global Competitiveness Report. What you see there is the highest score is in gray, so the country which has the highest score, and you see Ireland's score in blue. In terms of extent of staff training, 66.3, that essentially means it's about 2/3 of the way to what the frontier, which is 100. Quality of vocational training, 64.1. The highest rated country is at 90.8. Skills of graduates, 68. Digital skills among the active population, 66.5. Ease of finding skilled employees, 62. This is one that has been declining faster than others in the last couple of years. And again, not surprisingly in the current labor market. And then finally, critical thinking in teaching, 51.1, which is why I also mentioned the piece around learning 4.0. So what are we trying to do at the World Economic Forum on some of these issues? We've set up what we call a Closing the Skills Gap Accelerator model. And that's essentially countries who choose to take a whole-of-government approach, which is cross-ministerial, and bring on board the largest employers in that particular country, as well as representatives of SMEs, to work together collectively on this problem, because as I mentioned earlier, collaboration between the public and the private sector is one of the fastest ways to get change done. The way we try to do this is, instead of a lot of very specific projects, take a much more exponential improvement type of approach, an accelerating systems approach, which sounds incredibly similar to Future Jobs Ireland. And so I think that is an approach that is, to some extent, already being taken here. What we try to focus on is 4 areas. 1, lifelong learning and upskilling. 2, future readiness and employability. So that's basically the current workforce and the future workforce. Innovative skills funding models. For most of this to happen, individual company budgets and separated out public budgets will not be enough. There may need to be new approaches to skills funding. And then finally, skills anticipation and job market insight. So using a lot of the new big data that is available and actually providing a much richer picture of what is happening in the economy and a much more dynamic picture, because a lot of that data we're able to scrape very quickly as opposed to national statistics. We've set up this global learning network in several places around the world. In dark blue, you see the accelerators that already exist, or the global knowledge partners, so countries like Denmark and countries like Singapore that are very good at doing this. And then there are countries that are invited to join this global learning network, either as champions themselves or because they plan to pilot out certain initiatives through this group. Thank you very much.